Lucky we love you. Lucky we miss you.
For years, South Africa mourned the loss of reggae legend Lucky Dube as just another statistic in their crime epidemic.
Country's most iconic legends who left a legacy of love, of tolerance, of change.
The reggae legend Lucky Dube, he passed away after being shot.
A tragic death on 18th of October in 2007 when he was murdered.
One of South Africa's most beloved musicians was killed in a botched hijacking.
But what most people don't realize is that his death wasn't random at all. And the truth behind those final moments reveals something far more chilling about the violence that took him. This is the story of how a father dropping his kids off at home became the victim of South Africa's most notorious crime, and why his murder still echoes today. Before we begin, this case involves discussions of gun violence and loss. All details are based on verified court records and news reports from the investigation. Lucky Philip Dube wasn't just a musician, he was a voice for the voiceless. Born on August 3, 1964, in the township of Ermelo, South Africa, Lucky grew up in the shadow of apartheid. His mother, Sarah, was a domestic worker who raised him alone after his father abandoned the family. They lived in poverty, the kind that reshapes your understanding of survival. But Lucky had something that couldn't be taken away, a gift for music that would eventually make him one of Africa's most beloved artists. He started singing in his school choir, then joined his siblings in a Mbaqanga group. That's a traditional South African music style mixing jazz, African rhythms, and soul. But everything changed when Lucky discovered reggae music. Bob Marley's message of freedom, justice, and resistance spoke directly to his experience under apartheid. Lucky realized he could use reggae's universal language to tell South African stories. Stories of oppression, hope, and the dream of a better tomorrow. By the 1980s, Lucky Dube had transformed into South Africa's reggae king. His albums sold millions. Songs like Slave, Together as One, and House of Exile became anthems of resistance. He sang in English, Zulu, and Afrikaans, making sure his message reached everyone. White South Africans, Black South Africans, colored communities. Lucky's music united people during a time when the government worked tirelessly to divide them. Here's the thing. Lucky wasn't just performing music, he was performing hope. When he sang about freedom, people who'd never experienced it could imagine what it might feel like. When he sang about justice, families who'd lost loved ones to state violence felt seen. His concerts weren't just shows, they were gatherings of defiance, celebrations of survival. By 2007, Lucky was 43 years old and had released over 25 albums. He toured the world, performed for Nelson Mandela, and inspired a generation of African artists. He was a father of 7 children and deeply devoted to his family. Those who knew him described a gentleman off stage, someone who never let fame change his humility or his connection to his roots. He still lived in Johannesburg, still drove his own car, still picked his kids up from school like any other dad. October 2007 was supposed to be a good month. Lucky had just returned from a successful European tour. His music was still climbing charts across Africa. He was planning new projects, thinking about the future. His children were excited to have him home after weeks away. Everything felt normal, peaceful even. On the evening of October 18th, Lucky was doing something he'd done 1,000 times before, dropping 2 of his children off at their home in Rosettenville, a suburb in southern Johannesburg. It was around 8 p.m., still light enough to see clearly. The neighborhood was quiet, residential, the kind of place where families felt safe. Lucky pulled up outside the house in his Chrysler 300C, a nice car, but nothing excessive for someone of his stature. His children got out, waved goodbye, and headed toward the house. Lucky waited, making sure they got inside safely. He was that kind of father, protective, present, always watching until the door closed behind them. In those final peaceful moments, he had no idea that 3 men had been watching him. No idea that they'd mistaken his car for someone else's. No idea that in less than 60 seconds everything would be over. But just as he prepared to drive away, those 3 men made their move. And what happened next would leave an entire nation in tears. Let me take you back to earlier that evening, because understanding what happened to Lucky Dube means understanding the wave of violence sweeping through Johannesburg in 2007. South Africa was 13 years into democracy, but the promised Rainbow Nation was struggling. Crime rates had exploded. Carjackings happened daily, sometimes multiple times per day in major cities. Armed robbery had become so normalized that people accepted it as part of urban life. You didn't just worry about your safety, you expected danger. The 3 men who would kill Lucky Dube that night were part of this criminal ecosystem. They were young, desperate, and armed. They'd been driving around Rosettenville looking for targets, expensive cars, distracted drivers, opportunities. According to later police reports and trial testimony, they were specifically hunting for vehicles to steal. This wasn't about Lucky Dube, the reggae star. They had no idea who he was. To them, he was just another person in a nice car. When they spotted Lucky's Chrysler 300C parked outside the house, they made their decision. The car fit their profile. Expensive enough to sell, new enough to fetch good money from chop shops that dismantled stolen vehicles. They pulled up behind him, guns already drawn. Now, imagine this. You've just said goodbye to your kids. You're sitting in your car, probably thinking about the drive home, maybe about dinner, maybe replaying a moment from the tour. Your guard is down because you're in your own neighborhood, outside your own home. Then suddenly, there's a knock on your window. You turn and see a gun pointed at your face. That's the moment Lucky Dube found himself in. One of the carjackers demanded he get out of the vehicle. Witnesses who later testified said it happened incredibly fast. Seconds, not minutes. Lucky tried to comply. According to the investigation, he attempted to exit the car, but something went wrong. Maybe he moved too slowly. Maybe the carjackers panicked. Maybe Lucky showed even a second of resistance, trying to protect what was his. The gunshots rang out across the quiet residential street. Lucky was shot multiple times. The bullets tore through his body, his torso, his organs, vital areas that no human can survive without immediate trauma care. He collapsed, bleeding heavily. The carjackers didn't even take the car. The moment they realized what they'd done, that their victim was fighting back or that they'd made the situation too hot, they fled on foot, abandoning their original plan entirely. Neighbors heard the shots and came running. Lucky's children heard them too. Imagine being a child, safe inside your home one moment, then hearing gunfire and realizing your father is outside. By the time people reached Lucky, he was dying. Emergency services were called, but Johannesburg's response times in high-crime areas were notoriously slow. Lucky Dube, the man who'd survived apartheid, who'd sung his way from poverty to international fame, who'd spread messages of peace and justice around the world, lay bleeding on a suburban street because 3 men wanted his car. He was pronounced dead shortly after arrival at the hospital. The official cause of death: multiple gunshot wounds. He was 43 years old. The murder happened around 8 p.m. on October 18, 2007, in Rosettenville, Johannesburg. The location was just outside his children's home, a place that should have been safe. But here's what makes this even more heartbreaking, and what police would later confirm during the investigation. The carjackers had targeted the wrong car. They'd been looking for a specific vehicle belonging to someone else in the area. Lucky Dube died because 3 criminals made a mistake. His death was senseless, random, and completely avoidable. News of Lucky's murder spread through South Africa like wildfire. By the next morning, the entire nation knew. Radio stations played his music non-stop. Television channels interrupted regular programming with tributes. People who'd grown up listening to his songs couldn't believe it. The man who'd sung about slave systems and oppression, who'd preached unity and love, had been gunned down for a car that his killers didn't even steal. What police discovered next left everyone speechless. The 3 suspects had been involved in multiple carjackings across Johannesburg. They were part of a larger pattern of violent crime that had been terrorizing the city for months. But catching them wouldn't be easy. They'd gone underground immediately after the shooting, knowing they'd just killed someone famous, and that the public pressure on police would be enormous. The investigation moved quickly, though. Witnesses came forward. Forensic teams processed the crime scene. Shell casings were recovered. Within days, police had developed strong leads. But that's not the strangest part. What came next would reveal just how deeply South Africa's crime crisis had embedded itself into everyday life. The manhunt for Lucky Dube's killers became one of South Africa's highest priority cases. The police formed a special task force. The public offered tips and information. Everyone wanted justice, not just for Lucky, but for all the victims of senseless violence who never got headlines or national mourning. Within 2 weeks, police arrested 5 suspects. Their names were released to the press: Ludwig Habeni, Mbuti Mebe, Sifiso Malanga, Julius Joa, and a 5th man whose charges were later dropped. They were all young men in their 20s and 30s. During interrogation, they initially denied involvement, but the evidence was overwhelming. Ballistics matched. Witnesses identified them. Cell phone records placed them in the area. One by one, their stories began to crack. During the trial, which stretched over several months in 2009, prosecutors painted a devastating picture. These weren't criminal masterminds. They were desperate men making desperate choices in a society where poverty, inequality, and the aftermath of apartheid had created a generation willing to kill for quick money. The court heard testimony about the moments leading up to the shooting. Witnesses described seeing the confrontation. Forensic experts explained the trajectory of bullets and the cause of death. The defense tried to argue mistaken identity and lack of concrete evidence, but the prosecution had built an airtight case. One of the accused eventually broke down and provided details that only someone present could know. He described how they'd been driving around looking for cars to steal, how they spotted Lucky's Chrysler, how the plan went wrong when Lucky didn't immediately surrender, how the shots were fired almost reflexively. Here's the thing that still shocks me. None of them knew they'd killed Lucky Dube until they saw it on the news the next day. When they realized who their victim was, they panicked. The carjacker who provided testimony said they'd made the biggest mistake of their lives, but remorse doesn't bring back the dead. In March 2009, 3 of the men, Mbuti Mabe, Sifiso Malanga, and Julius Joa, were found guilty of murder and attempted carjacking. The judge, speaking during sentencing, called the crime senseless and a tragedy for South Africa. Each was sentenced to life imprisonment. The sentences weren't just about punishing 3 individuals, they were a message about how the nation viewed crimes like this. Lucky's family attended the trial. His mother, Sarah, the woman who'd raised him in poverty and watched him become Africa's voice, sat through testimony about her son's final moments. His children had to live with the knowledge that their father's last act was making sure they got safely inside before he died outside. In victim impact statements, family members described the hole Lucky's death had left, not just in their lives, but in African music and culture. The public reaction was immense. Memorial services were held across South Africa and internationally. Tens of thousands attended his funeral in Johannesburg. Fellow musicians from South Africa and around the world paid tribute. Bob Marley's family sent condolences, recognizing Lucky as one of reggae's greatest ambassadors outside Jamaica. Nelson Mandela, South Africa's first black president and Lucky's longtime supporter, issued a statement calling the murder a loss for all humanity. But Lucky's death did more than create mourning. It sparked a national conversation about crime. People began asking uncomfortable questions. How had South Africa become so violent that an internationally beloved musician could be shot dead on a suburban street? Why were carjackings so common that entire communities lived in fear? What had gone wrong in the transition from apartheid to democracy that left so many young men feeling they had no choice but crime? Some pointed to inequality. Apartheid might have legally ended in 1994, but economic apartheid continued. The gap between rich and poor was among the widest in the world. Townships still lacked basic services. Unemployment was staggering, especially for young black men who'd been promised opportunity but found only closed doors. Others pointed to the failure of the criminal justice system. Overwhelmed courts, under-resourced police, a culture of impunity where criminals believed they'd never face consequences. Lucky's music became a soundtrack for this reflection. Songs like Crime and Corruption and Different Colors took on new meaning. He'd spent his career singing about the problems that would eventually contribute to his death. There's a tragic irony in that. The messenger warning about danger becomes danger's victim. The three men convicted of killing Lucky Dube remain in prison today. They've occasionally appeared in parole hearings, but each time, victim impact statements from Lucky's family have helped keep them behind bars. His children, now adults, have spoken publicly about growing up without their father. They've described the trauma of that night and the long journey toward healing. Some have pursued music themselves, carrying forward Lucky's legacy. In the years since his death, Lucky Dube's influence has only grown. New generations of African artists cite him as inspiration. His albums still sell. His songs are still played at protests and celebrations. Statues and memorials honor his contribution to music and social justice. In 2013, a documentary called Lucky Dube, the Reggae Ambassador, told his story for international audiences. Schools and community centers bear his name, but here's what we should remember. Lucky Dube didn't die because of anything he did. He died because a broken society produced broken men who saw a car instead of a human being. He died because violence had become normalized. He died because three men were desperate enough to kill and stupid enough to think they could get away with it. His death forced South Africa to look in the mirror. Some things changed. Increased police presence, tougher sentencing for violent crimes, community watch programs. But the underlying issues, poverty, inequality, trauma passed down through generations, those are harder to fix. They require sustained effort, resources, and political will that's often lacking. Lucky Dube's legacy isn't just his music. It's the questions his death raised and the conversations it started. It's the reminder that no one, no matter how famous, how beloved, how positive their impact, is immune to senseless violence. It's the challenge to build societies where young men don't grow up believing that crime is their only option. It's the call to honor victims not just with tears and tributes, but with action that prevents future tragedies. So, what do you think? Has South Africa learned from Lucky Dube's death, or is the violence that took him still claiming victims every day? Was justice truly served with 3 life sentences, or should more have been done to address the root causes that created those 3 killers? Comment below with your thoughts. If this story moved you, subscribe for more true crime stories told with respect and heart. Lucky Dube's voice was silenced that October night, but his message of unity, justice, and the power of hope over hate, that lives on. And maybe that's the most important legacy of all. The question is, are we listening?